Hello everyone, and welcome to the Nutrition Foundation module. My name is Lara Nasreddin and I'm a professor of nutrition. And I will be giving you the first introduction. This brings us to the discussion of proteins. And as you know, proteins are vital cellular working molecules. Without them, life would not exist. And they are constructed, so they are macromolecules, long molecules that are constructed from chains of amino acids. So they are, what chains of amino acids is called peptides. Here you have polypeptides forming a protein. A typical protein would contain somewhere between 200 and 300 amino acids. Again, when we talk about amino acids, that there are essential amino acids and there are non-essential ones. The essential amino acids should be consumed from the diet because the body cannot synthesize them, obviously. And so out of the 20 different amino acids that are known to us, we have 9 that are classified as essential, and you need to know them. These are shown in the first part of the slide under essential amino acids. So what does the protein do in the body? It is you have the working protein and you have the structural protein. The working protein is the enzyme, is the hormone, is the antibody that's produced in your body. And the structural proteins are those that are incorporated within cell membranes, within muscles, within bones, etc. The sources of protein in the diet can be from animal sources, including milk and dairy, but of course meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, and plant sources such as pulses and legumes, so legumes and chickpeas, beans, broad beans, fava beans, nuts and seeds. And the difference between these two categories is that the animal source is usually a complete protein, so it provides us with all the essential amino acids. Remember, essential amino acids cannot be produced in the body, whereas the plant sources, most of them are actually incomplete proteins, so they may lack one or more essential amino acids. This is why there is the concept of protein quality. So, and we do recommend consuming good quality protein. So what does determine the quality of the protein? First of all, it's digestibility, but also the amino acid composition. Usually the animal protein has a high digestibility because, you know, the digestibility and therefore higher bioavailability as compared to the plant protein. But also the animal protein, like I said, has all the essential amino acids, so its quality is higher. Animal proteins are complete except for the protein gelatin. Plant proteins are of a lower quality. They do not contain all the essential amino acids. So they are all incomplete proteins except for soybean. You might be asking yourself, so what do vegetarians do who do not eat animal protein, or at least vegans, who are the most severe form of vegetarianism? So there is the concept of what we call protein complementation. So protein complementation is that when you complement by adding two different types of plant proteins in order to create a complete protein. So you have the example here. For example, legumes have isoleucine and lysine, but they do not have methionine and tryptophan. But the grains, like rice, they have methionine and tryptophan, but they don't have isoleucine and lysine. So when you eat something that brings together legumes and grains in one dish, you have actually created a complete protein. So the principle of complementation is something that we spend time teaching, patients about it, especially if they prefer to follow a vegetarian type of diet. So our traditional foods, for example, like mdardara or like mjaddara, which integrate lentils with rice would give you a complete protein, although it's based on plant-based foods. The AMDR for protein is somewhere between 10 and 35% of energy. And of course, growing children, pregnant women, might need a higher amount of protein. But again, within this range, it's okay. Some people say that athletes would require a higher amount. Studies have shown that athletes, because they have higher energy needs, they eat more because they have to sustain their energy and replace the energy they are losing throughout the training. They will eat more, and because they eat more, they have the opportunity to meet their protein needs through the diet. There is no need to consume higher amount of proteins unless in certain specific situation. But simply because they eat more, they can actually meet their protein requirements. So this is the range, 10 to 35%, that applies to everybody. You might be on the higher end, on the lower end, depending on several factors, including your preferences. If I want to look at the RDA is expressed as follows. Protein for the general population is a 0.8 gram per kilogram body weight per day, and this is important to know. Of course, these protein requirements would increase, for example, in stages like pregnancy, and it will reach 1.1 gram per kilogram body weight per day. And now we will talk a little bit about fats. Of course, these are organic compounds that are insoluble in water, but are soluble in organic solvents such as chloroform. Usually, excess energy from the diet is typically stored as fat in the adipose tissue. Just to give you an idea, in accumulation of 1 kilogram of fat in your adipose tissue, so if your weight increased by 1 kilogram of fat, this corresponds to approximately 7,000 calories of energy. So you need to have consumed above your needs 7,000 calories of energy to be able to store your 1 kilogram of fat. So if I want to work it out over a week, if every day during that week you were exceeding your energy needs by 1,000 calories every day, that would accumulate into 7,000 over that 7-day period. And yes, by the end of these 7 days, you would have gained a kilogram of fat. Fats can be solid at room temperature. We call them fats. So the lipids that are solid at room temperature are referred to as fats, whereas the lipids that are liquid at room temperature are referred to as oils. Where do we get our fats from? Animal fats come from, from the mammalian fat or stuff like that, such as butter, margarine, milk, cheese, eggs. The vegetable fats come from seeds and nuts and coconut and vegetable oils. And sometimes we like to teach the patient about the invisible fat. So the visible fat, you're seeing it. It's a butter in front of you, or a teaspoon of oil, or you can see it, or a spread of margarine. But the hidden fat are things that are a little bit more difficult for people. For meat, for example, you have different cuts of meat. The lean meat has the lowest amount of fat compared to the regular cuts of meat. So it can be hidden in meat, in milk. Okay, milk appears to you as milk. You don't, but you have the full fat options and you have the skimmed options. So that fat is not visible, but these are things we try to work on with the patient to basically identify the hidden sources of invisible fat. The classification of lipids, so you have what we call simple lipids, such as the triglycerides, because it's all made of fatty acids attached to one glycerol molecule. So one glycerol molecule attached to 3 fatty acids. This is a triglyceride. as opposed to the compound lipids, like the phospholipids, because here, in comparison with the triglyceride, you would have one fatty acid being replaced by a phosphate group. So it's not only made of fatty acids. This is why it's not simple. It's compound because one of the fatty acids here is replaced by a phosphate group. And this is, for example, lecithin in eggs is a phospholipid. And we have something called the derived lipids, such as cholesterol. So what are fatty acids? Like you know, they are long chain of carbon and hydrogen, and at the end you have a carboxylic group, COOH. And each fatty acid would differ based on length and on the degree of saturation. So the length, you have what we call shorter chain fatty acids, medium chain fatty acids, and the long chain fatty acids. So, but apart from the length, there is also the degree of saturation. So, as you can see in the slide, saturated fats or saturated fatty acids have no double bonds whatsoever. The monounsaturated fat, it has only one double bond, and you can see with the double bond you introduce some bending in the structure. The polyunsaturated fats have two or above. Okay, so they have two or more double bonds, and you can see that each double bond introduces an additional bend. And it is this, the bending that happens because of the number of double bonds will have repercussions on whether, you know, they are solid or liquid at room temperature. And of course, it can affect their physiological functioning. In general, vegetable oils and fish oils are rich in unsaturated fats and therefore are more liquid at room temperature and are healthier in the body when consumed. While animal fats are rich in saturated fats, they tend to be more solid at room temperature, such as butter, for example, or ghee, and are less healthy. Where do we find saturated fats? So saturated fats are mainly present in animal products such as beef, chicken, and fish, but also, like I said, in milk and dairy products that are whole fat, of course, in butter and in margarine, but they are also present in coconut and palm oil. So despite these being plant-based oils, they are very high in saturated fats. Whereas the unsaturated fat, here we have the MUFA, monounsaturated, and you have the PUFA, the polyunsaturated. So the MUFA is found in olive oil and in avocado. The PUFA is divided into two classes, the omega-6 fatty acids and the omega-3 fatty acids. The omega-6 fatty acids are found in all the vegetable oils that we know, so the safflower oil, corn oil, etc. The omega-3 fatty acids, we're going to talk a little bit more about these, are present mainly in fish and in flaxseed. You can see here next to PUFA, there is the linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 fatty acid and is an essential one, so the body cannot produce it. And you can see the alpha-linolenic acid. This is an omega-3. It's a plant-based omega-3, and it is found in flaxseed, and it is essential also. So what is the difference between omega-3 and omega-6? This refers to the number of carbon when we are counting from the methyl end, the number of carbon that has the double bond. So you can see here that in the first example for the omega-3, from the methyl carbon, from the methyl end, we have 1, 2, 3, and then you have the double bonds. This is an omega-3. The second example, from the methyl end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is where your double bond is, and this is an omega-6. So this is what it means, omega-3 or omega-6. So within the omega-3 and the omega-6, like I said, we have two essential polyunsaturated fatty acids, the linoleic acid and the alpha-linolenic. They cannot be synthesized in the body. They should be provided by the diet, and they are essential for the brain and nerve development. And eventually, this is why we need a certain amount of fat in the diet. amongst other reasons. So what's the difference between these two? Omega-6, which is very, like I said, available in most of the oils that we commonly use for cooking. So the parent fatty acid is the linoleic acid. In vivo, it gets converted to arachidonic acid. And then it will be acted upon by these two enzymes, cyclooxygenase and lipooxygenase, to produce a family of eicosanoids, such as prostanoids and leukotrienes. This family of omega-6 derived eicosanoids in high amounts leads to pro-inflammatory and pro-thrombotic effects. So it's not a good thing. The omega-3, so if you're taking omega-3 from flaxseed or from walnuts, these are the plant-based molecules that contain this omega-3 fatty acid. This alpha-linolenic acid will be converted in vivo to EPA and DHA, which then will be acted upon by cyclooxygenase and lipooxygenase to give me the omega-3 derived eicosanoids, which are in sufficient amounts anti-inflammatory and anti-thrombotic. If you're eating fish, you don't take alpha-linolenic acid. Fish already contain ready-made EPA and DHA. This is why it's important to consume fish, because they provide you already with these EPA and DHA ready-made. However, if you're consuming only plant-based omega-3 from flaxseed and walnut, only 5–6% of this alpha-linolenic acid is converted to EPA and DHA. So you may not be able to meet your needs, if you don't consume fish. And this is why we always recommend the consumption of fatty fish in the diet, such as salmon and sardine and, certain types of tuna. Twice per week of fatty fish is important for health. Because if you don't have omega-3, you will not have competition at the level of these enzymes, the cyclooxygenase and the lipooxygenase. If all what you're taking is omega-6, it's always going to be the pathway of the omega-6 that's going to win, and you will have always these omega-6 derived eicosanoids. So this, in somebody who needs to remain healthy, this should be offset or balanced with a certain intake of omega-3 fatty acids to compete and produce also omega-3 derived eicosanoids. And this is the balance, there needs to be a balance between both. Another type of fatty acid you might hear about is the trans fatty acids. Some trans fats exist naturally in ruminant-based products such as meat and dairy, but the highest amount of trans fatty acids come from hydrogenated oils. So it results from an industrial process whereby they are transforming liquid vegetable oils to make them a bit more solid and to make them at least viscous, because they will become more stable during the processing and the industrial utilization. They are cheap to make, and they will, be easier to manage in industrial processing. However, during this hydrogenation process, some double bonds will shift from the cis configuration into the trans configuration, and hence they are called trans fatty acids. And these trans fatty acids are unhealthy. We will see why. But where do you find them? You find them in most processed foods and in commercial fast food chain products, in pastries, in donuts, in croissants, in fries that are commercial made, and ready-made pizzas, and margarines and shortenings. The good news is that some countries and developed countries are actually finding ways to decrease the production of trans fatty acids, and it's kind of banned now to have hydrogenated oils that contain trans fatty acids. We have not reached that level, but we are hopefully on the process to also, ban trans fatty acids from ready-made products. Cholesterol is also another type of fat. It's a derived lipid that can be synthesized in the body. Cholesterol is usually transported via lipoproteins in the circulation, including LDL and HDL. So they both carry cholesterol, although maybe in different directions. LDL carries cholesterol and distributes it to the tissues that need it. HDL is involved in what we call reverse cholesterol transport, so it kind of picks up the excess cholesterol and takes it to the liver. If you have a high level of LDL cholesterol, this is what people refer to as the bad cholesterol, it can lead to atherosclerosis, yani the deposition of plaque on the walls of the arteries, so it can cause to problems with the heart. And this is why, you know, there is sometimes a focus on cholesterol in the diet and on saturated fat. So it's mainly saturated fat in the diet and possibly also cholesterol, but together they have a synergy in basically increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease. So if you have somebody who tells you that I have a high LDL cholesterol, so I'm hypercholesterolemic and have high LDL cholesterol levels, the best thing to limit in the diet is to limit high-fat dairies and milk, to limit red meat, to limit poultry, to limit butter and margarine, and of course, to avoid high-fat desserts and salad dressings. We advise them to replace as much of these things with olive oil, with fish, fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, and pulses. The recommendations for total fats are somewhere between 20 and 35% of your daily energy intake, but you also have, you know, for PUFA, it's up to 10% of calories, and for MUFA, it's up to 10% of calories, and it should be less than 10% of your calories from saturated fat. This is just a visualization of the sources, dietary sources of the various types of fats. You can see that coconut oil has a very high level of saturated fat, even higher than butter, whereas olive oil has the highest amount of monounsaturated fat, which are healthy. So remember, I said trans fat are unhealthy and they are worse even than saturated fat. So saturated fat can increase LDL cholesterol. I mentioned that earlier. But trans fat can also do that. They increase LDL, but trans fat in addition can also decrease HDL. So this is why it's even worse than saturated fat. And this is also just for your information to see that, for example, in the American diet, the top sources of saturated fat in the diet came from cheese, beef, and milk. To conclude, we saw the macronutrients, but I want to introduce you a little bit to the food groups. Because when you have a balanced diet, you need to have a balanced intake from all of these food groups. The food groups we have are the fruits, vegetables, grains, protein foods, and dairy. And in this table, based on your caloric needs, for example, if you need 2000 calories per day, you need to take 2 servings per day of fruit, 2.5 servings per day of vegetables, 6 servings of grains and cereals per day, 5.5 servings of protein foods per day, and 3 servings of dairy. In the coming slides will be just a quick, idea about what a serving is. So if I'm talking about fruits, and assume you are taking a 2000 calories diet, you will need to take 2 servings of fruits per day. Here you have examples of the serving. So the serving can be a small apple, a large banana, 2 large plums, things like that. Please familiarize yourself a little bit because we might try this in the interactive session. If you're for the vegetables, you need 2.5 servings of vegetables per day if you need 2000 calories. Again, if you remember the slide before, it depends on your caloric intake. So if your caloric intake is 3000 calories per day because you exercise, the number of servings would also increase. So the example of a vegetable serving is a large tomato or 2 medium carrots. For grains, it's 6 servings per day, again for a 2000 calories diet. So this can be, what can be the serving? It's, for example, 1/4 a loaf of Arabic bread, 1 slice of a toast or pain de mie, 1/2 cup of cooked burghul, things like that. And protein foods, in the category of protein foods, you have 2 subgroups. You have the animal-based, fish, poultry, meats, and eggs. And you have the protein-based, the plant-based, eggs, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And again, you need 5.5 servings per day. An example of a serving is like 1 ounce or 30 grams of cooked fish, but it could also be 1/4 a cup of cooked lentils, for example. Again, these are examples of the daily products. 3 servings per day, and again, we always recommend low-fat milk or even skimmed. Example is 1 cup of milk or 45 grams of cheese. And thank you for your attention.